Hey everyone. Today I'll be going in depth, probably not reviewing or if not, going into depth with these two Genesis devices. I know I have a lot. I have a few of them of this era. I know. More than a few. This is like three or no. These early 2000 Genesis devices, I want to share some things about it. This is another unbiased file on reviews. The 2000's Genesis. So the models I have here are my ADT G1 rebranded specifically, ADT G1 V15 remote strobe. This is my first Genesis true remote strobe, despite it having the horn chime, whatever the case is, grills, and also my G1R HOV30. Which I may be the third to have a G1R HOV30. I know Simplex Alarms, one of the old school collectors from the old school community, has one, and so does New England Elevators, but sadly the horn on his doesn't work is great, but not that I'm trying to boast or anything, but I feel sorry for him for having to go through that. But yeah, you can see I'm just going to be reviewing the early 2000 Genesis devices, particularly the first and second generation ones. Yes, I'm aware of the first generation models. So, which had the more broadband tones, the different sound that was often compared by the Integrity in 2000, which also carried over to the second generation. Yes, I said that because this when I got both of these, this one has a date code of 2002, specifically 18th week of 2002. So it's a little younger than one of my other ADT rebrand ones, the ones with the fire lettering, the ADT G1F HOV75. And this one has a date code of 8th week of 2003, roughly the tail end of the second generation units. The second generation units bared very close resemblance to the first generation ones, except the notable change is that they changed the original first generation units, depending on what the color had from what I was told and what I've seen. The red ones had a red backplate, whereas the white ones had a white backplate. Now I don't know the frequency overtone for the. I do have a feeling that the broadband Genesis horns from this era, which were labeled H instead of HO, because the HO would be labeled for HO, meaning high output horn, whereas the H would be just low output horn. The low output ones were more broadband, but I've seen a lot of theories on that these HO units would replace the H horn models. That is completely untrue. They would both the HO horns and the H horn models were replaced by the HD units, which from the Multi Candela series. Might I add, the manual. Look at that. Read that carefully. Low output, high output. The set the X, although the low output ones are often compared to the integrities, the sound of it, but I do not feel like they sound alike. I'll make that clear, but that's just their own opinion, and I respect that. But at the same time, this actually happened in the second generation. They were still in production up until late to that August 2003 when they were replaced with the multi Cantella models, which use a dual output horn. Now, this one has these early first and second generation ones had only fixed candela strobes. The third generation ones brought, well, I won't say that, excuse my French. The first multi candela Genesis devices were the second generation, particularly the speaker strobes, which were released in mid 2002. Which, don't get me wrong, they actually still had the EST logo or the rebrand logo, depending if it was a rebrand or not. But is quite interesting, to be honest with you. And I'm actually getting a Genesis speaker strobe from 2003, early 2003, from the second generation, which, yeah. And when the second generation came, they also had the H horn, the HD, no, excuse me, HO horns, which would be the only ones of that era to have fire marking models. The H horns did not have them whatsoever. But then there's your manual. ADT is the ADT rebrand. E is Edwards. M is Murto, now Vigilant. But then got absorbed under Kid A. XLS is Honeywell. Z, I have no clue. Dash LG suffix. Designation indicates Siemens. Yes, that Siemens that also owns Faraday and Cerberus Powertronics, and formerly Landis and Gyre, or before they got sold. But yeah, pretty interesting stuff. But yeah, now let's pop the covers open, investigate how it works. So insert the screwdriver to press the tabs. Do not pull it backwards. Twist the screwdriver. Do not yank it back because that will damage the tabs. I've learned that the hard way. And there is the cover. You can see there is your inside. There's the horn right there, the horn Piazza. And there's the 30 candela strobe in this case, but let's pop the cover open on the ADT. Just a gentle twist. You don't need to forcefully jerk the screwdriver back when you're popping the covers open. Because like I said, that's a great way to break off the tabs. So you can see this. They're practically the same device, other than the Candela rating, the cover, rebrand, and this one has no horn. Obviously, I will tell you one of the gripes that I've seen collectors have with the Genesis series is this flash capacitor for the strobe and horn strobe units. Do not touching those touching those little rods that connect the flash capacitor to the screwdriver. No, excuse me, the flash capacitor to the board. Do not touch those at all. That when the device is running, that'll give you a nasty shock. That's a really good shock hazard. But to put the cover back on, you put the bottom in first. If I can do this with one hand and snap it on the top where the tabs, like that. Whereas you can see there are two jumpers. The J1, which I believe, look at the manual. J1 to change the horn from temporal to just continuous. Jumper 2 would give it a private mode outputs, meaning that train staff would have to evacuate the occupants instead of the devices. Pretty basic stuff. And there's your screws that can be annoying on the back. Your terminals, like so. The Edwards logo, the Edwards Systems Technology inscription on the back, which, yeah. And then there's the older style lens, which can be found on Genesis devices from the early 2000s era, from 2000 to 2003. But like I said, the early first generation ones, which are like 2000 production run, roughly had either a red back if it had a red cover, or a white gloss white if it had a white cover. Whereas the second generation ones, which the H horns were still offered, yes. I will clarify that once again. They actually and they were while coexisting with the HO high output ones with the modern Genesis 3.2 kilohertz sound with a 3160 hertz overtone sound file. Yeah. they would change the the same colored as the covered back plates to a gloss black for the second generation. But yeah. And then they would also release the speaker strobes, and then during that time the ceiling mount horn strobes, and then they would then the third, which would both which the speaker strobes and the ceiling mount devices were multi-candela at the time. They had no fixed candela units, but afterwards they changed the generation to the third generation. So yeah, I am well aware. So, and I'm actually trying to hunt down a H horn model, but at least this is the next best thing because of the severity of the rarity of the because of how exceptionally rare the H horn models are. I mean, they're no joke. I'll tell you that much. But it isn't their novelty items because of how rare they are. For EST does not substitute for any of the model number options, which are rebrands, obviously. But E would be Edwards signaling, obviously, which is a branch of Edwards dedicated to other signaling stuff. But at the same time, since these devices work really well, I'll give them a 100 out of, well, more like a 97 out of 100 because of the flash capacitor issue. But anyway, really great devices. Thank you for watching.